Now, the 2020 16 Days of Activism, it ran from the 25th of November to the 10th of December. But we continue that conversation moving from awareness to accountability today. And what better way to start talking about kingship than with a martial artist, co-founder of the Bois Academy, husband, father, and silverback, Rondel Benjamin. Thank you for joining us, sir. How are you?
Good day, good day. A real pleasure to be here with you and, talk the things that we need to talk about.
Definitely, and this is why I actually said that the title of this is Big Man Things with Rondel Benjamin. Because I find a lot of, especially in that 16 days of activism, one of the things that I saw is there are a lot of men talking to women. There are a lot of women talking to the universe, but I don't necessarily see a space for men talking to men. So, and with that in mind, I want us to start the conversation talking about objectification. And I'll even throw in the caveat, I also mean how men look at themselves and see other men in the space that they work with. Your take on that, Rhonda?
So, one of the things we have to recognize is that gender-based violence has a lot to do with the way we self-identify. When we look at our identity and how it's constructed, any imbalance in this identity produces the outcomes we see in. If you are too much in terms of how you see yourself, narcissistic, or you're too little, you see yourself as inferior, you will then lash out against the world to try and enact and get the world to recognize who you are as a man. One of the things that we have to look at is that there's been this big shift, and the shift is in separating self, who we are, from what we are. Because that's where objectification comes in. When we start seeing ourselves as things, and therefore we see the other as a thing. So we interacting from one thing to the next, and not one living, breathing, loving human being to our next living, loving, breathing human being. So in our culture, between media, community, all the messaging we getting from all the different spaces around us are telling us that the women in our space are things to be looked at, aimed to acquire, things to use for our pleasure, and also things that we can't necessarily access. And this desire to access what you can't have, we know that has caused some serious problems.
Now, in terms of that, trying to access the unattainable or what may not be as readily available at this point in time, what do you think are some of the impacts that the pandemic would have had on that definition or that overview that you just gave us?
It's challenging. The pandemic has done one of two things. It's going to either force us to look inward or to look more externally, all right? Especially if you're in any one of these extremes, the pandemic will just accelerate where you are at any given point in time. So there's a lot of people in our communities who see the pandemic as one of the best things that ever happened. You have time again with your family, time with the women in your life, time to go and look for granny, go and make sure mommy all right. When you're living in that space, then women in your community are just members of your community, and you just want to make sure they're all right too. And when you come from that space, it's not that complicated. But when you flip it and you look at the other side of it, where men, especially because of our society setup, men don't really have friends. Men have people who they drink with, not talk to. Men have people who they don't really get to confide their deep emotional self with. And so now you have this further isolation. Some people feel trapped inside of the home. They probably have lost their job, their inability to generate the kind of economics that would help the family out, builds anger and rage. And then what you do is you take that out on those who are closest to you. So obviously the rate of sexual and home-based, gender-based violence has skyrocketed. And we have to, as men, step up and say, one, the primary perpetrators of gender-based violence in our communities are men. But then there's also the caveat, which is when you're talking about objectification, right? The primary murders in Trinidad and Tobago are men who are murdering other men. The largest number of suicides in Trinidad are men committing suicide. The largest number of people being incarcerated in our prison system are men. So there's a lot more nuanced, and a lot of things we have to take into consideration. And this is where fraternity and brotherhood comes in, because we can't have this conversation without creating the context for it. We have an environment that's driven by economics, historical violence, and the geography of being in the southern part of the world, a part of the world that was under colonialism for like 400 years. We have the social construct. Our society is a society that is very striated. Race, class, gender. Who you are in this world is often determined by how you look and where you're from. And these factors are impinging or pushing people into these boxes that they feel they can't get out of. They can't express themselves fully, who they are and what they're about. And this all collates or coalesces into this environment that, for me, is very, very violent.
And with regard to that, and looking at boxes and roles and constructs, we have about 3 minutes more on this half of the conversation. But the path to mastery, some would say, it requires that you stay on the path. In terms of like you have a goal, you have a vision, and you move towards that. But sometimes it's so easy to fall off of that path. Some people would say that the road to hell is paved with good intentions. The warrior's journey or the warrior's path, how does that come into play during a conversation like this?
Well, I come from a tradition where warriorhood and masculinity is constructed in a different way. I'm a practitioner of martial arts and Trinidad and Tobago stick fighting. And real talk, one of the most essential and critical phases in self-development is the knowledge that one has the ability to protect themselves at all costs in any space and any time. Once you have that single wedge built into your personality, then you can develop deep confidence. And people who are confident and balanced and assured that they can take care of themselves and the people around them tend to not be people who then go around hurting other people. So the way of the warrior is about accessing your personal power. And when you access personal power, it creates absolute confidence in your ability to operate, to be liberated, to walk in freedom. And you know, when you look at Trinidad and Tobago and our history of Kalinda, it was the Kalinda practitioners who created liberation and freedom in the 1881 Cambole riot that allowed us to become who we are now. And so it's really accessing this tradition that we have here that speaks to being very confident in your personal safety, and that then leads to a whole bunch of other cool stuff.
And that brings to mind the saying that has really hurt people who hurt people. Because you're saying if you have that confidence and you have that vibe, well, nah man, I'm good. I can deal with the situation no matter the situation. You're a little more likely to be on the side of peace. Because I remember someone also saying that the fact that you're peaceful doesn't mean that you're incapable of violence, but you make that choice.
Well, true nonviolence is the choice to do no harm. But you cannot have choice if you're not capable of violence. And it's a weird kind of opposition of ideas, that those who are capable of doing harm then have the true ability to choose to not do it. So nonviolence comes from a place of competency. One of the things we have to look at is Caribbean masculinity. We're looking at patriarchy trapped in a world that is really matrifocal. We are granny brought up people. We are people who have a society of women who coordinate and help our society. And we battled against this European idea that domination and control of community has to be about big man thing. We had to look at what is a victim and what is a perpetrator, and how women and men both are executing violence against our children. And then our children grow up to be violent. And the blame is on neither group, but on us as a community. We have to do better, because you're right, hurt people hurt people. And the people who hurting people are in some time in their life, they were a victim who is now acting out.
And we continue this conversation on the other side, but we are speaking Big Man Things with Rondel Benjamin, and we are going to come back with so much more. Stay with us. Welcome back. We are speaking with martial artist, cultural researcher, and practitioner Rondel Benjamin. And Rondel, we ended the last half talking a little bit about communities and building communities. you are a member of many communities that would provide safe space while building capacity and competency dealing with violence. What are some of those things that you try to focus on, and actually what are some of the communities?
Well, the communities we mainly focus on is Gracie Jiu-Jitsu Trinidad and Tobago, which is a martial arts organization based in community, and it's really about providing people with the tools and skills to really take care of their physical security, wellness, and health. And then I'm a culture man, so I love Trinidad and Tobago culture with my whole heart and soul. And so, I'm a co-founder of the Bois Academy at Trinidad and Tobago, which seeks to generate impetus behind our national indigenous martial forms. Um, Three things kind of about community. We have to recognize that our environments are deeply impacting the violence that we have. There's a really cool thing out there, anybody who's interested, look up crime prevention by design, where people are now recognizing when they restructure communities and the geography and the spaces and places, they can create spaces that are physically generating more safety. We have to look at in our community, socialization is the key, right? Because it's community intervention that will counter poor community that caused the problem in the first place. Because personal safety really is a group thing, a tribe thing, a family thing. And the last thing that we really focus on is establishing a baseline of mental toughness and resilience. Because people who are resilient and mentally tough are able to confront the problems in the society we live in and start to execute the actions required to get us where we need to be.
Now, and staying within that community or those communities and those circles, and I use the word circle guardedly, knowing that circle can have different meanings. But one of the things that we find is that sometimes conversations happen between men, and then there's something that is said in jest, but at the same time, what is joke for schoolboy is dead for crapo. What are some of the ways that sanctioning can happen, or checking your brethren, or making sure that these things are kind of nipped in the bud from your experience?
So let's look at culture. In Akan culture, and it's rife in Trinidad culture, there's something called rituals of insult. In America, it's a game called the dozens. In Trinidad, we call it old talk or pecan. We have to create spaces where people can speak the unimaginable and the unthinkable in ways that allow us to develop resilience against those negative ideas. Part of that, obviously, is understanding that in old talk, we can challenge, guide, protect, and help by using old talk as a way of stimulating thought and thinking. So when I talking to my brethren, it's not preacher Benji on a pulpit trying to tell you that God say do this and God say do that. That's not what's going on. I'll be real. We talk real things, sexuality, rape culture, drug culture, all them things. It's things man had to sit down and talk about and do what we've always done as a people. Attend to our internal scars and trauma by sharing and laughing and talking and building a good vibe in a good community that will cause us to just challenge each other. But I'll be honest with you, I really believe that the key to big man thing is the example you set, right? You gotta walk the walk. So really, people don't listen to what you're saying so much as the way you're doing. And there's be watching you. And an old stick man, Congo Barra, my main teacher say, when you listen to your inner man and you walk your walk, demon, devil, angel, or God, all of them have to back. Because, pure heart coming through. Righteousness is the way. So not in the biblical sense, but just walking with that integrity that connects to your deepest self, your intuition and your instinct, and having confidence that that's enough. You'll find your way.
I want to go back to the point of Caribbean masculinity, Benji, because and walking your walk and traveling on your path, there would be mistakes, slips, stumbles, but in terms of moving towards a higher self, there's actually a term that I found called the somatic arc of transformation. And the idea is that you're moving from commitment to one thing and basically evolving. So how do you kind of get to that level of evolution so that it's not something that you necessarily need to think about. I mean, it's only until someone broke my leg for me that I was not really walking on the outside of the road closer to traffic or walking behind a female going up the stairs or in front of her coming down, because it's just so kind of ingrained. But how do you ingrain that so it's not something that you need to think about and then act, as opposed to there's this kind of fluid mind-body connection?
Well, that's the very core of any martial or cultural movement tradition. Somatic is the body, embodiment, living in your body, connected to your intuition, your instincts, how your heart beat when you walk past somebody who giving you that off vibe, trusting your instincts, and slowly over time developing the ability to recognize why you had that off feeling, right? Those things are things that have to be taught in schools, in community centers. You know, in the past, we did it through things like 4-H Club, Cub Scouts, Police Youth Club. There's many organizations, the football teams, cricket teams. There are countless institutions in our cultural framework that understand that learning is embodied and not just between your ears and reading big books with big words. And we have to have elders who the younger ones can model themselves after and who will challenge them on their arc and provide rituals of initiation or crossing over to let them know, yes, you're going on the right path. And that's how culture and society was set up. Stick fighting is a ritual of initiation. I'll guarantee you this, the stick fighters I know are very non-violent people because they've expressed and exposed themselves to safe, secure, playful violence to understand the boundary conditions under which they have to operate in. And when you don't get that right, you get, because life will check you. And when you get it right, things will flow smoothly. Caribbean masculinity is really not about masculinity. Caribbean masculinity is really about Caribbean community. Because men are part of community, you know, and every man has multiple faces, multiple voices, multiple feelings in his body. And we have to create spaces where people can explore this safely. What we do in the arts I practice is we help people explore by creating pressure, risk, and letting them work through their fears so that gradually over time they become inoculated and are able to operate in a kind of liberated mindset.
No, we have about 1 minute more, but there's an idea that I heard you express, and I like the fact that you spoke about having elders kind of guide your path through that evolution. Someone else asked you in another conversation, if there's someone who has a history, a negative history, would you train that person? Would you be a guide for that person? And you gave an answer. We have a minute more, asking you to ramage with it here. Thank you.
Yeah, our society must create spaces where reformation and recovery are available. Because somebody made a mistake doesn't mean that their life is over and that they cannot change. Obviously, they have to be in environments where there's a lot of control, and they have to be in environments where people are strong enough to check them. But I believe that that's our job, especially the martial artists in our society. People can change. And there's two things I just want you all to remember. Always ensure that you have physical skills and personal safety, and that you have psychological skills that allow you to protect your mind. That's the area where most of us don't spend enough time.
All right, so we want to thank you very much for the work that you do, Rondel Benjamin, and basically kicking off this week of conversations that we're having, dealing with some big man things and having men speak to men. So thank you once more for the work that you're doing. And on behalf of the entire news team, I'm DK Roster. Thank you for joining us. Have a good night.